Good morning everyone, good noon, good afternoon, good evening sa inyo tanan. Unsa oras ba mo kalantawan ni? Hi. Unfortunately wala mi ka-present atong Tuesday because naay memo nga holiday atong adlaw. Tapos because naay bagyo nga padulungay sa atong lugar, pero thankfully wala ra may nahitabo sa illegal as far as I know. So mira. Now before me mag-start sa mong lesson, which is life and death, I want you guys to think about your life right now sa an hourglass. So, ang hourglass kay orasan. Dili kay orasan pero katugong or siya Coca-Cola nga shape or number 8 nga shape nga glass. Tapos na ay sand sulod na nila, di ba? So, una-unaan ninyo nga ang each tiny grain ana nga mga sand kay mga moments of life na ninyo. Tapos makakita pod mo nga inyuhang hourglass kay napay mga sand na nabilin sa taas, napay mga sand nga na ato na sa ubos. So unsa atong mag get from this? So atong mag get from this kay dili ta maka-add og more sand, dili po ta maka-stop ani nga flow. So relating that to our lives, so actually this is the most simple and honest fact nga about atong kinabuhi is time is fixed. So now with this idea nga limited atong time, I want you guys to think over the last month or even last week. So asa ang most sa inyong time nga na butang? Maybe sa mga important stuff like magtuon, kinay quiz, na exam, or like kanang mutabang sa inyong mga parents and stuff, or like napadulong ba sa pag-scroll lang sa TikTok, sa Facebook, sa Instagram, sa Twitter, sa unsa pa ba na. So actually wala ko'y judgment towards ana, but ana lang just to check up of your time because your time is actually a fixed entity. So like hindi na to siya ma-change, but we must learn how to spend our time wisely. Now, kapalo na nga atong time is limited. So, dapat tumagulang na ahead of our time right now. So, for example, unsa kay pinaka-importante nga butang nga imong mabuhat ani nga lifetime? Basin maka imo kag mga medisina or unsa ba na. So, actually, ang kani nga view kay maka-force siya sa tuwa nga dapat i-choose na to ang unsay truly important because we need to keep that feeling of clarity or urgency within sa tuwa, and those feelings are the feelings that we need to explore today in this discussion. Now, take a look ani nga slide. May clock, may roses, may skull, may text pod. Now, life and death. What is the first thoughts in your mind when you hear the words of life and the word death? So probably black and white because white contrasts black and black contrasts white, or even green and red, and probably your loved ones that have passed away, your late loved ones. So these words actually come hand in hand like a package deal. So nanang mag-start na diri because atong discussion today kay na built around siya sa kaninga truth. Uncomfortable siya nga truth, pero we must face it. Human persons are oriented toward their impending death. So una-una daw kanang mga pets ninyo, iring or iro or ilaga unsa ba na, kay they just live life until they can't. Pero sa tuwa, humans, kay kapalota nga matay ta in the end. So kapalota nga atong time kay fixed, and kaning idea or knowledge nga atong time kay limited ra kay is actually what makes us human. And if it forces us nga dili lang ta mag-live carelessly, but we need to start meaning something. We need to start making meaning of the things that we do. And kaning awareness nga atong life kay heading towards death ra kay muni mag-start sa search for answers sa atong life. Unsa bay purpose ani or unsa bay meaning ani. Now, if kabalo man gali ta nga atong life kay mo end ra gyapon, then what makes life meaningful if like matira gyapon ta sa end? Anong mag-bother pa man ta nga mag-struggle or like anong magtuon pa ta, anong mag-quiz pa, anong na pa exam or like anong magtrabaho pa ta if mamatay ra gyapon ta sa nalasan, why bother? So for some, what makes life meaningful is probably money or their family even, or like those people who fight against corrupt politicians. That probably makes their life meaningful. The answer to this question tells us to put our limited energy and values that to those things that are truly worth keeping. So, to begin finding answers, dapat tumabalik sa mga sinaunang panahon, sa mga OGs. Now, let's talk about this painting. So, what can you see in this painting? Probably first thing makakatch sa inyong mata kay kanisya. Ano naman siya gigunit? Tapos ano na siya gihatag siya? Or even kanisya, nag-point pa siya towards the heavens or sa baba na. Ganun kanisya galing pagtasikilid. Actually, this is a very famous painting because ano niya? So, actually, this is Socrates in his deathbed, his final moments. So, kanisa kay mo ni mga students ni Socrates, and as you can see, even though patio na siya ron, kay the lesson po siya sa students. So ing ana siya ka dedicated towards philosophy, towards finding the meaning of life and stuff. So actually this is Socrates in his deathbed because he was forced to drink poison, this poison which is hemlock, because young city, I think city of Athens, felt that nag-corrupt siya sa youth, which is his students, because of his constant questioning. Unaw daw na namatay siya for philosophy. You can see nga dili kayo siya emotional ani kay mo siya ready ani nga moment, di ba? He's a philosopher, so he's actually trained for this moment. Now, before ta mag-dwell on his views about life and death, let's talk about his ways of teaching his students. So first, we have Socratic method. So ang Socratic method kay I'm pretty sure familiar ni sa tuwatanan. It assesses the character of the student through questions. Now, I'm pretty sure nga kabulota nga na 7 steps, di ba? But actually, na duha ka processes ani, which is the ironic and the meiotic stage, a process actually. First, which is the ironic stage process, exposes ignorance by showing their contradiction. In this process, he would act dumb, like magpabugo-bugo siya, then example first kay mangutana pa siya, then magpabugo-bugo siya. Anong ingani mo ni? Anong ingana man na? For example, what is love? Then he would ask that to his students. Then his students would answer that question. For example, love is this. Then Socrates would ask that student again about what is this and how is that connected to love, and etc. He would do that over and over again until that student realizes nga naka-make sila mistake, or show that student nga wrong siya, which is ironic because we think that we are right but actually we are wrong. So that's where the name of the process came from, which is the ironic process. Next is the meiotic process, which draws us the truth out of the mind after realizations in the ironic process. Now, for the meiotic process, you would pull out the real truth out of the student's mind because he believed that ang truth kay nasulod sa imong daan, but he was just the meiotic, or like he was just the midwife. So actually the meiotic stems from the word midwifery, and so may buhaton sa mga midwives. We help deliver the baby. So if we Connect that to his Socratic method, the baby is like the truth, and he would help deliver the truth out of the mind to show the real truth. Next is the expository method. So, kaning method kay mas simple siya ug mas direct because it from this statement, it answers the student's direct or implied questions. So, more siya opposite sa Socratic method because it would just simply state facts because it answers the student's direct questions and it fills the gaps where knowledge is missing. Now, for example, pangutan ko nimo nga kanang sa mga gipanganak ingon ko kaning adlaw. So that's basically the expository method, and that's for teachers mo na usually ginagamit sa TOA, pero I think ang Socratic method pud kay relevant po siya karon kay maklaro po siya sa ubang teachers sa TOA nga mo po ginagamit nila, pero mostly kaning expository ang ginagamit sa education. But actually, even if yung gi-answer directly ang question sa mga students, would still keep it philosophical because it would sometimes show nga ang mga beliefs nato kay mag-contradict siya towards each other. For example, mag-ask students about forgiveness, but like yung student kay mag-answer og believe ko forgiveness pero mo believe ko strict punishment. So like, what's the point of forgiveness even if matuo pa kag strict punishment? So those ideas conflict each other. So he would actually show examples and analogy to clarify ideas. Next are the views of life and death for him. So for him, knowing oneself is vital in resolving life's problem because he believes that all our bad choices or our sadness comes from not knowing our true self, and hence he says that the unexamined life is not worth living because if you live based only what society tells you to want, for example, money, fame, what else, those things, without ever asking why, kay imong kinabuhi kay dili siya truly free. Wala siyang wasted opportunity kay wala ka kabalo nganong imo ning gipangbuhat sa imong kinabuhi. So next, he actually believed that the greatest harm is to commit an injustice because it damages the perpetrator's soul or the inner self. So for Socrates, he actually holds the soul as like the highest being of a human because for him, losing your house is nothing compared to making your soul bad. We must prioritize our soul in our day-to-day lives to not damage the inner self. And next is, he insisted that all virtue is a form of knowledge. So for him, people only do evil things because gawin na sila nga makabenefit siya sa iyaha. Pero ignorant po siya sa mga butang nga mahitabo kuya ng buhaton. So, for him, people only do evil things because they mistakenly think it will benefit them, proving they are ignorant of the real good. And finally, for him, the role of philosophy was to prepare oneself for death because philosophy makes sure that our soul is pure. Next are the quotes that reinforce his views on life and death. First is, to fear death, gentlemen, is no other than to think oneself wise when one is not, to think one knows what one does not know. For him, it's arrogant to fear death because wala po takabalo if sakto ba ni if good ba siya or bad. We don't really know that because kalangan sad na yung mga namatay na daan tapos tubagong tana nila, wala mo ginahitabo ng anak. Because there is only one good, knowledge, and one evil, ignorance. So, reinforcing his views on all virtue is a form of knowledge, he believes that the only evil in this world is ignorance because ignorance branches out into doing evil things because the act of ignorance causes us to do evil things. Next is, the real danger is in life is not death, but living an evil life. So this goes hand in hand with the former quote about ignorance, because he believes that ignorance is evil, but and then he believes that the real danger in life is living an evil life. So that goes hand in hand together. Next is death may be the greatest of all human blessings. So actually for Socrates, naay two scenarios about death. Ang first kay eternal sleep, ang second kay afterlife. So for him, blessing ang death because first, let's talk about his scenario about an eternal sleep. He believes that posible ang death kay eternal sleep pa siya, which means that death removes our consciousness, which means that we don't feel or we don't think or we can't even do anything. So there's actually nothingness after death. Pretty sure nga mo po na ginauna ninyo tanan, or like some of you may hold the same idea as him. And next is the afterlife. So he thinks that the soul is transported to another life, what do you call this, another land or another space in time that is better than this life. So for him, it's just a win-win situation. Either you feel nothing or you just feel goodness. Next, be of good cheer about death and know this as a truth, that no evil can happen to a good man either in life or after death. Because for him, virtue is knowledge, right? And evil stems from ignorance. And if you live rightly with knowledge, which knowledge is virtue, if you live rightly, you are protected forever. Now let's head on to the next philosopher, which is...
Hello, manager about Cuarto, and we're gonna get to it. Now, in this slide, I suppose, shows a painting of multiple people here. Now, what is this painting? Well, this painting here is the School of Athens made by Raphael. It is a gathering, it shows a gathering of some of the greatest philosophers, mathematics, and scientists from classical antiquity. Now, if we focus on the middle, or in the center of it, we see two people. And these two people are some of the most famous philosophers in philosophy in general. And obviously, it's Socrates, I'm kidding. It's Plato and Aristotle. Socrates is somewhere here, but I can't tell. I think it's the guy on the slide. Anyways, if we look and examine their poses, we can see that Plato in the left is pointing upward, while Socrates is pointing downward, or raising a hand, I suppose, not really pointing. And it refers that Plato pointing upwards to the theory of forms, where somewhere out there exists the perfect forms of everything we see. And Aristotle, being the observer he is, points downwards, the empirical or physical world. Now, what is Plato's perspective on life and death? Well, if we remember correctly, on Plato's whole thing, okay, not really whole thing, he does multiple things, but his most famous concept, if you will, is the theory of forms, or the allegory of the cave, where the things we see are merely shadows of the real truth in the world of ideas. The bottle I'm seeing right now, there's a bottle right in front of me. It's not the ideal form of a bottle, but I consider a bottle on my mind. Same with a chair, form, or maybe same with a chair, electric fan, or maybe even your girlfriend if you have one. And also, because of this, universal and external ideas, not the physical ones, are concepts that literally exist heavens above men. Concepts such as life and death in this topic, or maybe even truth or emotions, if you will. And because of this, contemplation, to Plato, is the only available means for a human to be free. Now, what is contemplation? Well, contemplation doesn't simply mean passive thinking or really deep thinking, but it also means doing good or thinking hard about one's actions. Instead of going head first and thinking what's the first thing come to your mind, you contemplate on what is the good or the best course of action to take. For example, say you're in a McDonald's and the line is big and you're hangry. Not hungry, hangry. So you're pretty pissed off. Your stomach rumbling and all that fun stuff. Now, of course, you could simply cut the line and get your food right now, or you wait. Or you contemplate that you should wait first. This is the best course or good action, essentially. Now, Plato also suggests on the theory of immortality, where the soul is immortal and the physical human body is a source of all endless trouble to us. Trouble such as emotions, such as love, fear, or rage, or even diseases, such as COVID. And he also suggests that to see the truth, we must simply quit the body. Instead of letting our emotions or the things that the body give us, diseases, straight ahead, we should look at the truth. Instead of listening to our emotions, we should instead see the truth of what is. An example of this is social media. Obviously, if you see like your favorite creator getting slandered on something, you first react to defend your creator, but then you wait a little and think. Instead of reacting to emotions, you start to search why people are acting this way. And yeah, he also suggests that knowledge can be attained, if at all, only after death. Now, why is the soul immortal? I'm gonna go on a ramble here. Give me a second. Now, we must take a look at a different theory. It is called Plato's Phaedo. It is where he writes a story about Socrates contemplating on what is life and death, and he comes with three arguments: the cyclical argument, the argument from recollection, and the indestructible soul. The cyclical argument is where things are born from the opposites. An example of this is waking up and sleeping. Waking up and sleeping are inherently opposites of one another. When we wake up, when we sleep, we wake up again, and then when we wake up, we eventually go back to sleep if it's considering an exam week. But what about the things that do not have an obvious opposite? An example of this is, the table is in front of me. Table in itself doesn't really have an opposite. Table comes from root, and I don't think wood is an opposite of table. But if we go to a different perspective, not a table is the opposite of a table. I know it sounds off, but Now, how does this apply to life and death? Well, inherently speaking, life and death are simply the opposites of one another. And when we live, we will eventually die. And by conceptually speaking, when we die, we will eventually live again. I will go into more detail later in that one. Now, the second one is the argument of recollection. And it is where when we learn stuff, it is not learning new information in entirety, but is actually recollecting knowledge that the soul possessed before the birth. Now, from the cyclical theory, if you remember correctly, that I mentioned, this is dying comes from life. He states where when we die, we will eventually come back to life, and then the soul forgets all the knowledge that we have from a previous life. Isekaiing too. No, I think it's more like Oshinoko, but it's like isekai, but you forget everything. But instead of going to a different world, you go to the same boring, okay, I wouldn't say boring, but same world. An example of this is where when we learn something like maybe like a life advice from your lolo, we sometimes feel like we know that already, if you will. But we can't really pinpoint where. It is simply the soul recollecting previous knowledge from its previous life. And the last argument is the indestructible soul. It is simply a conclusion that the soul by itself is immortal. When the body dies, the soul lives on, therefore proving that the soul is immortal because of the cyclical argument and such. Yeah. Now, some quotes to prove this, what he just said. Any man whom you see resenting death was not a lover of wisdom, but a lover of the body. Now, if we previously remember what we just stated, the body by itself is the source of all of our endless pain. And if we love the body, we are inherently resenting death by in and of itself. Because when we die, the body, well, dies, it withers away and back to where it came from, not your mother's womb, no, to nature. And if we love the body, and as we just stated before, through loving the body, it hinders us from fully seeing the truth, therefore not calling us not a lover of wisdom. He also suggested that no one knows whether death may or may not be the greatest of all blessings for a man, yet men fear it, as if they knew that it is the greatest of all evils. It is common knowledge that when we die, no one knows what truly happens after that, whether if we isekai, we go to heaven, or some other religion you believe what comes after death. But men naturally fear it, as if it were the greatest of all evils. Some other quotes is that life must be lived as a play. A play will eventually end, so we must live it to the fullest. And for a man to conquer himself is the first of all those noble victories. Himself referring to the body, and the victories is wisdom.
So now let's move on to Aristotle's philosophy. For Aristotle, everything in nature seeks to realize itself, to develop its potentialities, and finally realize its actualities. Actuality refers to the complete and maturest form of a creature or being. And Aristotle believes that everything in nature seeks to realize itself, to develop its potentialities, and finally realize its actualities. Aristotle coined the term entelechy, meaning to become its essence. And according to Aristotle's concept of entelechy, everything in nature seeks to realize itself, to develop its potentialities, and finally realize its actualities. Some quotes that reflect the ideas of Aristotle are, "Now death is the most terrible of all things, for it is the end, and nothing is thought to be any longer either good or bad for the dead." So, death is the most frightening thing because it represents the end of everything. End of life, of change, of potential. Life is where we can make choices and reach our potential, but death strips us of that privilege, and we can no longer experience or do anything anymore. The next quote is, "The ultimate value of life depends upon awareness and the power of contemplation rather than upon mere survival." So this means that the true worth of life isn't just about being alive. It's about being aware, thinking and understanding. For simply breathing, eating, sleeping, all our daily necessities are not enough to make life meaningful. We must find value in our lives through thought, interpretation, and reflection. The next quote is, Happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. To put it in simpler words, the reason we live, act, and make choices is to find true happiness. Not temporary fun, but for a sense of accomplishment. Or in other words, eudaimonia. And the last quote, virtue is the golden mean between two vices, one of excess and the other of deficiency. Meaning virtue is found in the balance. Every trait has two extremes, excess and deficiency. The golden mean is the middle point between the two extremes. For example, confidence, too much of it tends to lead to arrogance, while too little leads to cowardice. But the golden mean of the two is courage.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, evening to everyone listening. I am Jaime Dagondon, and today I will be discussing to you Friedrich Nietzsche's view on life and death. But first, let me introduce to you who Friedrich Nietzsche is. Friedrich Nietzsche, born on 1844 and died on 1900, was a German philosopher, cultural critic, poet, and philologist, whose ideas have had a profound influence on modern philosophy, literature, and psychology. He is best known for his critiques of traditional morality, religion, and societal values, famously declaring that God is dead, to challenge the foundations of Western thought. Nietzsche explored concepts such as the will to power, the Übermensch, Overman or Superman, and the eternal recurrence, urging individuals to create their own values and live authentically. Though often controversial in his lifetime, his writings continue to provoke discussion and debate, shaping existentialist and postmodern thought. Okay, let us continue. He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow. So what does this mean? Oops. Wala na, mali ko, sorry. Ay, ano din. Kinidaya ang first, guys. So kinidaya na. So, yeah. Realizing one's higher self means fulfilling one's loftiest vision and noblest idea. What does this mean? This means that Friedrich Nietzsche believed that each individual has a higher self, which represents the fulfillment of their loftiest or peak vision and noblest ideas. To achieve this true potential, a person must set free themselves from the influences of society, culture, or religion that distort or suppress their authentic being. Nietzsche argued that those who fail to do so, who allow external pressures to dictate their lives, become unfree, and in his view, act against the natural purpose of human existence. Living authentically, according to Nietzsche, means embracing one's own values, striving for greatness, and fully realizing one's potential rather than merely conforming to expectations imposed by others. So his next saying is, the individual has to emancipate or free oneself from environmental influences that are false to one's essential being, for an enslaved individual is a disgrace to nature. This is what I had explained earlier. Another one is, emancipation is not enough. The free human being has to draw a sharp conflict between the higher self and the lower self, between the ideal, aspired to, and the contemplatively imperfect present. Nietzsche believed that simply becoming free from external constraints, emancipation, is not enough for true personal growth. Even a liberated individual must confront an ongoing internal struggle between the higher self, which aspires to lofty ideals, and the lower self, which is bound by immediate weaknesses and imperfections. This tension highlights the gap between the noble goals one seeks to achieve and the flawed reality of one's current existence. For Nietzsche, life is a continuous effort to overcome these limitations, constantly striving to elevate oneself despite the imperfections of the present. So let us now proceed to Nietzsche's will to power. So what is Nietzsche's will to power concept? It is one of his central ideas, and it's best understood as fundamental drive within all living beings to grow, assert themselves, and overcome obstacles. For Nietzsche, life is not primarily about survival or pleasure, as some philosophies suggest, but about expanding one's influence, creativity, and capabilities. The will to power is both an internal force, the drive to improve oneself, achieve goals, and realize potential, and an outward force, the capacity to shape the world, impose values, or leave a mark. It's closely tied to his idea of the Übermensch, because only by embracing and directing this drive can an individual rise above mediocrity, create their own values, and live authentically. Next is, because of will to power, this emphasizes an active self driven life dedicated to growth and the realization of a higher human type, the Übermensch, Overman or Superman. So, before explaining to you what an Übermensch is, let me first introduce you a short history as to how Nietzsche came up with this idea. So, Nietzsche is seen as one of the pioneers of nihilism, as well as a major contributor to the existentialist movement in philosophy during the 20th century. So, how did Nietzsche reach nihilist position and his concept of Übermensch? Since the Great Roman Empire, Europe was predominantly a Christian continent, and nearly all people followed Judeo Christian teachings of the teaching of the universe and the creation of human race. But during the 19th century, there was a huge cultural swift sweeping across Europe. The development of natural sciences and the works of Charles Darwin cast out the Judeo Christian religion, and people are starting to lose their faith and religion. And during these events, Nietzsche has concluded that God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderer of all murderers? This conclusion of Nietzsche may be dark, but it's summed up as to what is happening to Europe during this time of enlightenment. Imagine that for centuries, people strongly believed that one God had created them and that Earth was the center of the universe. This gave people a sense of purpose, no matter how rich or poor, or strong or weak. We had all been created by the same God for a specific reason, and we are all judged the same way. But as science developed and a theory of evolution arising, the faith of people began to fade, and religion was declining. And soon people began to doubt the legitimacy of the Bible due to the fact that it does not align with the natural occurrence according to the theory of evolution by Charles Darwin. And soon, God is dead. But with the death of God, it left a huge void in the lives of millions, and suddenly, we are no longer important. We are no longer the center of the universe and no longer have sense of purpose and morality. And morality means absolutely nothing because God no longer exists to punish evil and reward the good. Life was empty. Life was meaningless, and this was the birth of nihilism. Everything we had valued no longer meant anything, and life was full of void. Nietzsche believed that with the death of God, people would inevitably lead to nihilism. However, he believed there was a way to fill this void and bring some sort of purpose to bring back meaning to life. In one of Nietzsche's book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he came up with a concept of Übermensch, which means overman or superman in English. Now, he raised this concept because after the death of God, there would at least be someone or something that should take after God's place. And this would be someone or something like the Übermensch, in which Nietzsche thought these events would be up to mankind and thus strive for our own evolution for the next phase of man, the more superior man, the better man, the Oberman, the Superman. So what makes up an Übermensch or Oberman? So the Obermensch or Overman is Nietzsche's ideal of a human who has arisen above the limitations of ordinary existence and created their own values. Unlike those who follow society's rules or traditional morality blindly, the Obermensch lives authentically, embracing life fully, including its struggles, suffering, and mortality. This individual demonstrates self mastery, controlling desires and impulses instead of being controlled by them, and exhibits creativity by defining their own purpose and ideals. The Obermensch faces challenges and even death with courage, affirming life as it is, while remaining independent from conformity and external expectations. Ultimately, The Ubermensch strives for greatness, in, constantly overcoming limitations and striving to fulfill their highest potential, embodying Nietzsche's vision of what it means to live a truly human life. Okay, let us now proceed to, to a few of his quotes. One of his quotes are, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow." So, what does this mean? This quote expresses the idea that having a strong purpose or meaningful goal gives a person the strength to endure suffering, hardship, and difficulty. When someone knows why they are living, whether it's a dream, a responsibility, or a personal mission, they can face almost any challenges that life puts in their way. For Nietzsche, a meaningful question, why, transforms suffering into something bearable, even valuable, because it is part of a larger journey towards self fulfillment. Another quote is, "I know of no better life purpose than to perish in attempting the great and the impossible." Attempting the great and the impossible. Here, Nietzsche emphasizes that the highest form of living is striving toward great, ambitious, and even seemingly impossible goals. For him, greatness is not measured by success alone, but by the courage to pursue what is extraordinary, even at the risk of failure or death. To perish while attempting something noble is more admirable than living safely without challenging oneself. This reflects Nietzsche's belief that life's value comes from self-overcoming and striving one's highest potential. Third, third quote is, "Let us be aware of saying that death is the opposite of life. The living being is only a species of the dead, and a very rare species." In this quote, Nietzsche challenges that the idea of life and death are simple opposites. Instead, he suggests that life is just one small, temporary form within the vastness of existence, while death represents the broader, more universal state of being. In other words, life is rare and fleeting. While death is unnatural and inevitable, by framing life this way, Nietzsche invites us not to fear death, but to recognize the preciousness and rarity of being alive and to live boldly while we can. Excuse me. Last quote, last but not the least, of one of his quotes are, "If a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live." This statement reflects Nietzsche's belief that a meaningful life requires deep commitment to a value, purpose, or ideal so important that one would be willing to sacrifice everything for it. Without such a passion or principle, a person drifts through life without direction or depth. For Nietzsche, true living means having convictions strong enough to shape your life, and strong enough that you would defend them even in the face of death. So, before ending my report, let me conclude to you that Friedrich Nietzsche challenges us to face life and death with courage, purpose, and authenticity. He reminds us that life's struggles are not merely obstacles, but opportunities to create our own values, strive toward our highest ideals, and become the fullest version of ourselves. By embracing the tension between our higher and lower selves, and by living with a meaningful why, we can transform suffering into strength and mortality into a motivation for greatness. Ultimately, Nietzsche's philosophy urges us not just to exist, not just to simply exist, but to live boldly, courageously, and intentionally making every moment of life count. And that would be all for Nietzsche. Thank you for listening.
Let me ask you something. Have you ever wanted something so bad, when you finally got it, you didn't feel satisfied for long? Maybe a new phone, a high grade, or someone's attention. But soon, you wanted more. That's exactly what Arthur Schopenhauer tried to explain. That life itself is an endless cycle of wanting and suffering. Every living thing is trapped in a cycle. We're born, we want things, we struggle to get them, we suffer, and we die. The next generation repeats it. For him, life has no ultimate goal. We keep chasing satisfaction, but every time we fulfill one desire, another one appears. And that constant wanting, that's what causes our suffering. Imagine for a moment you stop wanting. No jealousy, no stress. No pressure to prove anything. That's the state of peace Schopenhauer believed we should aim for. Most philosophers believe that life has meaning, that virtue, reason, or purpose can make us happy. But Schopenhauer didn't think that way. He had a rather pessimistic view of things in life. He believed that life is full of suffering and disappointment because our desires never end. Even when we get what we want, we quickly want something new. So for him, happiness is just a short break from pain. Other philosophers like Aristotle said happiness comes from living a virtuous life. Kant said it's about duty and moral action. Nietzsche, who came after Schopenhauer, said that we should embrace life's struggles and create our own meaning. But for Schopenhauer, he thought that the best thing we could do is stop wanting, or at least want less, because that's the only way to suffer less. So, let me share to you a quote from Schopenhauer. He who has lost all hope has also lost all fear. When there's nothing left to wish for, there's nothing left to be afraid of. That's when a person is most dangerous. Not because they hate life, but because it no longer holds them. So welcome to Schopenhauer. So who exactly is Schopenhauer? So Arthur Schopenhauer was a German philosopher who is known for his pessimistic view of life. He believed that the world is controlled by something called the will. Not our personal will, but an invisible force that drives all living things to survive, desire, and struggle. Think of it like the Force in Star Wars. It moves through everything, both good and bad. But unlike the Force in Star Wars, Schopenhauer said that it doesn't have a purpose. It just is. So, the will and the self. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that every person has the responsibility to become themselves. He said that only a few people ever achieve this because it takes courage and deep self-awareness. Unless we discover our true selves, life becomes meaningless. At the center of Schopenhauer's philosophy is the will. It's not just personal willpower, it's an invisible, irrational force that drives every living thing to survive, to desire, and to act. But this will has no ultimate purpose. And because of that, it can never be satisfied. It's like a hunger that never ends, you know? Okay. The Four Noble Truths and Suffering. So, actually, Schopenhauer's ideas were influenced by Buddhism, especially the Four Noble Truths. First is dukkha, life is suffering. Second is samudaya, which means suffering comes from desire. Third is nirodha, which means suffering can end. Fourth is magga, which means there's a path to end suffering. He believed that all life is suffering because we constantly desire things we don't have. And even if we get them, we start wanting something else. So for Schopenhauer, peace only comes when we stop chasing desires. So life, death, and illusion. Schopenhauer also said that our ego makes us think we're separate from others, that we can assert our will against them. But in truth, we're all part of the same reality. When we hurt others, we also hurt ourselves. He saw life as a constant process of dying. Everything we love eventually fades, but from loss, we learn the value of things. His quote, "Life is a business that does not cover the costs," means that no matter what we gain, it never truly balances what we lose. Finally, Schopenhauer viewed death as not something to fear, but as a release. To sum up, Schopenhauer teaches us that life's pain comes from endless wanting. The more we desire, the more we suffer. So maybe peace isn't found in getting more. It's found in wanting less.
Hello everyone. Today, we'll be discussing about Martin Heidegger's perspective on the meaning of life and how it connects to our human experience. Now, Martin Heidegger has already been discussed by Sir Sam, so today, this will be like a review or a deeper understanding on the particular topic, which is death and the meaning of life. For Heidegger, understanding the meaning of life begins with understanding existence, or what he calls Dasein, the human being, the human existence, who questions and reflects about life. Heidegger says that our existence is defined by care. But what does he mean by this? What is care? Care is the way in which we relate to the world around us and the way in which we engage with the world in our everyday lives, like how we interact. So care is not just a simple feeling or emotion, but it is a way of being in the world that involves both action and intention, like how we care about our future, our relationships, our responsibilities, and even our fears. Because we care, life becomes more meaningful. However, Heidegger also reminds us that life is finite. We do not live forever. Our time is limited. And because of this limitation, this is what gives us seriousness and purpose. We become aware that even choice matters in our everyday lives. The idea of being unto death is also introduced by Heidegger, meaning that only by honestly facing the reality that we will die, by anticipation, can we live a truly authentic life. Death is not something far away, because it is a possibility that can happen at any time, like how rain is a possibility that will happen tomorrow, or even next year, or even the next decade. And because of that, we must ask ourselves, how do I want to use the time I have? Heidegger believes that accepting our mortality pushes us toward resoluteness, a determined way of living that allows us to create unity and wholeness in our identity, which is, in other words, the meaning of life becomes clearer when we live with intention and responsibility. But not everyone agrees with Heidegger, like Landsberg, that argued that death does not give meaning. Instead, death cancels all possibility. It ends everything. So for him, death only shows meaning, but it must be found while we are alive, not in death itself. So what do you think? If we live forever, do we not find meaning? That's a question that you must ask yourself. So Heidegger's philosophy can also be applied to real life issues, like for example, the environmental crisis as discussed by Al Gore and Senator Lauren Legarda shows how actions reflect what we value. If we truly care about life, we must care for the planet that sustains it. Typhoons like Yolanda and Ondoy reminds us of the consequences when we neglect our responsibility to nature. Heidegger challenges us to live meaningfully by caring for ourselves, for others, and for the world we share. For we are part of a global community, and the meaning of our lives can be found in how we respond to the problems around us by choosing care rather than destruction. By choosing purpose rather than distraction, we shape a life that is authentic and meaningful. So in short, for Heidegger, the meaning of life is not something we discover once. It is something we actively create through our choices, our relationships, and the way we face our own finiteness. To live with meaning is to live with care. And that's all for Martin Heidegger's perspective on the meaning of life.
And now we'll proceed on to Jean-Paul Sartre with this idea of atheistic existentialism. So, first off, existence precedes essence. He pointed out that we are born without a predetermined purpose. We create our identity through choices. Example number one, imagine someone who grew up being told you are going to be a doctor. When they grow up, they realize they love architecture or engineering. Existentialism says they can choose that path. Their essence isn't decided by family expectations. Example number two is a shy person choosing to become a doctor. They weren't born to be confident. They're built in through choices. Next is absolute freedom and responsibility. Since there is no predetermined purpose or no higher power deciding your life, you're responsible for your decisions. Example, if you fail a subject, existentialism says you can't blame the teacher alone or bad luck. You still carry some responsibility, maybe some time management, effort, or your own habits. And then, next key point he pointed out is that we fill the world with meaning. Life doesn't come with meaning built in. You decide what matters. Example is some people may find meaning in life, others find it in career, faith, relationships, creative work, or service. Another example is two people can look at this same event and give it different meanings. Losing a game, some see it. For example, losing a game, some see it as a failure, others see it as a motivation. The meaning doesn't come from the event, you create it. Next is Sartre's dualism, and porosoi. Ensoi or it in itself means that objects simply exist. They don't think or choose. Example, a chair will be always a chair. A rock can decide to be a part of a building. Objects just are. Porosoi or for itself. Humans are different because we can imagine, choose, and change ourselves. Example, you can decide to study harder, shift your course, change your hairstyle, cut off toxic people, try new hobbies. You're never finished. You are always becoming. Next is mauvaise foi or bad faith. Bad faith means lying to yourself to escape responsibility. Example, saying I have no choice when actually you do. Staying in a toxic relationship but telling yourself this is my fate. Blaming the universe for your decisions. Telling yourself I'm not smart enough instead of just admitting fear or lack of effort. It's when a person wants the comfort of believing they have no freedom even if they do. Next is hell is other people. This means we often feel judged or defined by others. Examples, someone posts something online and worries about likes, comments, or criticism. Walking in class and feeling like everyone is watching you even if they're not. Be stereotyped because of appearance, grades, or friends. Misunderstandings of friendships because each person views the situation differently. Sartre says it's impossible to fully escape the influence of how others see us. Next is Sartre on death and life. His quote reminds us that death shouldn't paralyze us. It should motivate us to live meaningfully. Example, when people lose someone or face a near miss like getting sick or a scary accident, they often rethink their life choices. They start valuing time, relationships, health, and goals more. Death gives life urgency. It pushes us to live intentionally. Furthermore, he said that smooth transitions to personal insight. Connecting all of this to a more relatable level, many of us right now are trying to figure out our course, our career directions, our identity, how to deal with expectations, how to handle relationships or friendships. And that's exactly what existentialism describes. We are thrown into a world, and now we need to make choices even if they feel heavy or uncertain. Relatable examples for us students are not knowing your purpose yet but still trying to make a good decisions, feeling pressured by family expectations but wanting your own path, learning from past mistakes instead of hiding from them, and wanting to become a better version of yourself even if it is hard. Existentialism isn't about having all the answers, it's about owning your journey. And that is basically it for Sartre. John Paul Sartre's aesthetic, atheistic existentialism.
So now let's move on to Karl Jaspers. So as one of the very few Christian intellectuals in Germany, Jaspers resolutely opposed Nazism. He is the first German to address the question of guilt of Germans, of humanity implicated by the cruelty of the Holocaust. He said that caution must be exercised in assigning collective responsibility, since this notion has no sense from either the judicial, moral, or the metaphysical point of view. He places the person's temporal existence in the face of a transcendent God, an absolute imperative, and to live an authentic existence always requires a leap of faith. So, as was stated, Karl Jaspers was one of the few Christian intellectuals in Germany who stood against Nazism. He believed that it was important to question humanity's responsibility, especially after the Holocaust. But he also warned that we should be careful about blaming everyone. Collective guilt doesn't make sense judicial, moral, or the metaphysical point of view. So, dili kita tanan parehas og sala. And also, Jasper believed that our life on earth is always in the presence of a higher God, which is the transcendent God, he stated. And to live authentically always requires a leap of faith, as Jasper said, means that we cannot live fully if we do not dare to trust into something beyond our control. So kinahanglan kitag pagtuo bisan dili ta sigurado sa resulta. So there's a story that illustrates this. So, a 35-year-old man asked for a rose as a sign from St. Teresa's of Lisieux if he would pass the bar exams for lawyers. Once this man's prayer was granted, he promised to spread the devotion of praying 24 glory bees for 9 days. Just like St. Paul and St. Augustine, the man narrated how he was forced to accept the graces in the time of his desperation to pass the bar. Going through the experience with answered prayers and all, he was reminded, through the simplicity of St. Teresa's soul, how little and insignificant humanity is in the greater scheme of things. So, as what this story stated, like St. Paul and St. Augustine, he realized that grace often comes when we are desperate. And through his experience, he understood how small humans are in God's greater plans. So now let's move on to the authentic existence or existence. So for Jaspers, authentic existence or existence is a combination of freedom and God. Freedom alone opens the door to humanity's being, allowing the person to be what they decide to be rather than being what circumstances choose to make them. And it reveals itself as a gift from somewhere beyond itself. And freedom without God only leads to a person searching for a substitute to God closer to oneself, usually trying to be God. So, freedom allows a person to be who they choose to be, not what circumstances make them. And freedom reveals itself as a gift from somewhere beyond itself, or in other words, it is already given. It is not from ourselves. And freedom without God can lead people to try to replace God with themselves. Yeah, so what's right here, usually trying to be God. So now let's move into limit situations, grand situation, and transcendence. So in the face of sickness, unemployment, guilt, or death, we are at the end of our line. So at the limit, one comes to grief and becomes aware of the phenomenon of one's existence. The decisions that one makes on how to face these situations are their own and only their own, compelling the individual to confront the darkness stretching out from the limits of scientific thinking. So, life presents limit situations or this grand situation like sickness, guilt, unemployment, or death. And at these moments, we face our own existence fully. How we respond is entirely our own choice. Finally, Jasper reminds us that the more determinedly I exist as myself within the conditions of the time, the more clearly I shall hear the language of the past, the nearer I shall feel the glow of its life. So this means that when we truly live in our present, we also connect to the past, and we continue the life and wisdom of those who came before us. Next one is where all meaning disappears and all certainty vanishes. Something arises deep inside man, the self-preservation of his essential identity, and this identity preserves itself through endurance and through the courage to live and the courage to die with dignity. So, even when meaning disappears, something deep inside preserves identity. This happens through endurance and the courage to live and die with dignity. And the endurance and courage for Jaspers to find authentic existence, to live and to die with dignity, is the greatest expression of freedom. And finally, Jasper teaches us that to philosophize is to learn to die. Philosophizing is soaring up to the Godhead, the knowledge of being as being. So for Jasper's die, to philosophize is not only to think, it is to live with awareness that life is finite. So ang pagtuon nato sa philosophy, mauna po na ang pagtuon nato sa kamatayon or death. Dili aron mahadlok, kundi aron makasabot ta. So, yeah.
We've now reached the summary of this report, and first we'll start with the Greek philosophers, with Socrates being the first. He believes that life's meaning begins with knowing oneself, and it is taught using two methods, the Socratic method and the expository method. The Socratic method has questioning, breaking down problems, dialogue, and it includes the ironic process, which is clearing false beliefs by admitting ignorance, and the meiotic process, drawing out the truth from the learner. Now, as for the expository method, it gives direct teaching using analogies and explanations. His goal is to examine beliefs, remove prejudice, and think clearly. Now, second, we have Plato. The true meaning is found by contemplating absolute, eternal ideas. Earthly things are only shadows of reality. The soul ascends to the realm of real truth. And contemplation means doing good, not just thinking. Lastly, he believes that the body distracts us with desires. Pure knowledge only comes when the soul separates from the body. So Plato believes that pure knowledge would only come out when we separate ourselves from the desires, the earthly desires that we have. Third and last of the Greek philosophers we have is Aristotle. Everything has potentiality, what it can become, and actuality, its fulfilled form. All beings naturally strive toward their end, which is telos in Greek. And lastly, humans find meaning by developing their abilities into full maturity, the process called entelche. Now, to start off with the modern philosophers, we have Friedrich Nietzsche, where he believes that the meaning of life comes from pursuing one's greatest vision of himself. A person must free themselves from false environmental influences. After freedom, one must face an inner conflict between the higher self and the lower self. So he believes that a person must free themselves first from false environmental influences like prejudices, racism, and stuff like that. And after freedom, they must conflict themselves to attain the higher self and separate it from the lower self. Next, we have Arthur Schopenhauer. He begins with questions with, what am I? What should I do with my life? And he believes that each person is responsible for realizing their true self. The will drives all things, but has no final purpose, causing endless dissatisfaction. Now he says this, and he believes this, because he is influenced by Buddhism, where they believe that life is suffering because it is driven by desire, and ending desire reduces the suffering. He also believes that egoism makes us think others are separate, causing harm, but all are part of the same reality. Then we have Martin Heidegger. He believes that human existence is defined by care and limited time. Death gives urgency and meaning to our choices. Authentic life requires resoluteness, bringing unity to oneself within the finite time. So Martin Heidegger believes in authentic life, where you live authentically, you don't put up a mask. And having an authentic life requires resoluteness, or bringing unity to self within a finite time. So basically, having inner peace within the limited time or years we have in our life. Next, we have Jean-Paul Sartre, where he believes in atheistic existentialism, where existence precedes essence, meaning we create ourselves by our choices. No fixed nature or guideposts. Humans are fully responsible for their lives. The world has no meaning, and we give it meaning. And he also believes in bad faith, where he describes it as avoiding responsibility by using excuses, such as, "Oh, I was born this way, I can't change why I am narcissistic." And he also believes hell is other people. Yeah, it's a quote. Others objectify us, creating conflict and frustration. Last of the modern philosophers, we have Karl Jaspers, where he notably opposed Nazism or warned people against assigning a collective guilt. Karl Jaspers was one of the few recorded German Christians to oppose Nazism in his time. Now, he believed authentic life requires a leap of faith toward the transcendent, which is God or Allah for others, and to limit situations, sickness, guilt, unemployment, death, to reveal our true existence. Each individual must decide on how to face these situations. No one can decide for us, and freedom is a gift that opens human existence. But without transcendence, people try to be God themselves. So Karl Jaspers believes that freedom is a gift that opens human existence. Living an authentic life requires a leap of faith, or getting out of your comfort zone. And you would need to limit situations to reveal your true existence. And that's all for this review. Thank you for listening.